Welcome to China Insider. I'm David Zhang. Finally, the US is actually taking a step on Huawei and the national security threat it poses. The FBI, according to a CNN exclusive, is investigating Huawei's ability to interfere in US nuclear weapons communication. Huawei is a Chinese telecom company that is currently on the blacklist of the Commerce Department, but some say it still has room to create chaos. There's something about nothing good coming out of a free lunch, and it might be the perfect description here, because the focus is on rural America. Now, the equipment made by Huawei is capable of capturing and disrupting highly restricted Defense Department communications, including those used by U.S. Strategic Command, which oversees the country's nuclear arsenals. And rural America seems to be getting the cheap Huawei equipment, well, but they're not doing any good. Now, how exactly did it reach the American heartland and got the FBI notice? Well, money talks. Now, this is the focus of the Chinese Communist Party's years-long planning of campaign to influence overseas politicians through elite capture, and that idea of buying their way into Washington is very much real. The issue here is that the CCP is willing to spend money through companies like Huawei. And in other cases, the Chinese government would actually directly try to insert itself into Washington. According to CNN in 2017, the Chinese government was offering to spend $100 million to build an ornate Chinese garden at the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C., which is only 4 miles from the White House and some 7 miles from the Pentagon. And this was complete with temples, pavilions, and a 70-foot white pagoda. And the project thrilled local officials who hoped it would attract thousands of tourists every year. But hey, if the Chinese Communist Party is willing to pay for your Christmas tree, or a new security system, or even a new government building, the latter case actually happened in Africa, well, it could actually relate to spying and potentially espionage on politicians. Yeah, it's not good. Fortunately, US counterintelligence officials began digging into the details and they found numerous red flags. The pagoda, for example, they noted, would have been strategically placed on one of the highest points in Washington, D.C., just 2 miles from the U.S. Capitol, and a perfect spot for signals, intelligence gathering, and collection. Also alarming was that Chinese officials wanted to build the pagoda with materials shipped directly from China, likely, to the U.S. in diplomatic pouches, which the U.S. customs officials could not search from. Yeah, that's not a red flag at all, right? So what exactly did Huawei do? Well, Huawei is really the front name behind a massive network and a grand strategy to collect information and spy on foreign adversaries from the Chinese Communist Party's perspective. Now, top of that list is the United States, who China sees as the #1 enemy. Here's John Powson, author of The Wireless Wars, a book I recently read, and then I got to interview him about explaining to me what the situation is.
And this was one of the more surprising things I found in the book. I was talking to people and I said, why are they deploying in South Dakota and Montana and Alabama? And one person suggested it's because they know that South Dakota has as many senators as California. If they can get the phone networks put in, cellular towers, they'll have 2 senators that are screaming that you can't rip this out. My citizens, my people in my home state need this to communicate. But what I learned talking to the FBI, counter-intel officers at the FBI, was very different. What they said is, look at where Huawei has put their towers in rural areas. They're next to all the nuclear missile bases. They're next to the Special Operations Command, which are located out in rural areas. The nuclear subbase. What they would do is Huawei would go into these family-owned cell companies, not Verizon, but some company that has 50 towers, not 50,000. And they would tell them, we'll give you this gear. It's not $80,000 like Nokia would charge. We'll do it for $10,000, $5,000. And so they installed this gear. The family-owned businesses, they don't have the expertise. They don't have the money. They said, this is great. You'll put it in. You'll set everything up. But what you found was Huawei was suddenly deployed around all these sensitive bases and installations in the United States. And they were able to basically have their finger on the pulse of the communications that were coming out of those places, if they were able to access their own equipment, which in general vendors are able to do.
And this rural area problem is still existing today, right? Are those equipments still in place from Huawei?
You know, it's funny. You have Congress recognize the problem and announce, well, this won't do. We're going to rip it all out. They call it the Rip and Replace program. Yeah. It will appropriate $2 billion, and that'll pay for these rural family-owned companies to tear out the equipment and take care of it. So that's great. So I was speaking to people this week at some of these companies that are working on the replacement. They said, well, we haven't actually replaced anything yet because you can only replace it for like. So if you tear out 4G Huawei gear, you can only put in 4G Nokia gear. But the companies are saying, but we want to put in 5G now. Why would we replace 4G with old 4G? We want to replace with 5G. Well, that won't be covered by the program.
Now, the Chinese government always denies that they're spying on the United States, and through Huawei, to this day denies the existence of spying and any of its espionage allegations, which begs the question, how do you pull from the root of the Huawei ecosystem from especially rural America, where the key strategic nuclear facilities housing the U.S. nuclear arsenals are set up and situated? In 2020, Congress approved $1.9 billion to remove Chinese-made Huawei and ZTE cellular technology across wide swath of rural America. But as John Pelson mentioned, this effort requires a lot of work and money, and they're just not spending enough to replace the rural telecom with better ones. So it's basically the situation, if you wanted to get rid of the Huawei 4G, you'd have to side grade to another company, and it just didn't make sense. The FCC received applications to remove some 24,000 pieces of Chinese-made communications equipment, but according to a July 15 update from the Commission, it is more than $3 billion short of the money it needs to reimburse all of the eligible companies. So the question remains, what is Congress willing to do to fund the program to de-Huawei from the United States? And they should, right? This is a national security matter. Now, if you think about Huawei as a representative of the wider spying network, which China denies, things like TikTok, Zoom, or WeChat, these apps, or any companies based in China, that they can actually act as the same as Huawei, provided it is in the field of data collection when we're talking about phones and apps. So phone makers themselves, right, like Huawei, Xiaomi, or ZTE, they essentially create these giant manufactured spying gears. They're phones, but they're really spying on you. And they provide the hardware to actually house the apps that are from China, like TikTok. And you couple that with the Huawei telecom network, you essentially have this giant net casting over the heads of millions of Americans who may not want to spend as much money buying an iPhone or buying an Android, who also happens to be using apps that are from China, like TikTok or Zoom, and then they have to adopt the Huawei telecom equipment, so using their network. Fortunately, the issue is raising concerns now with the FBI, and after the Biden administration took office in 2021, the Commerce Department then opened its own probe into Huawei to determine if more urgent action was needed to expunge the Chinese technology provider from U.S. telecom networks. But that probe has proceeded slowly and is still ongoing. According to CNN, depending on what the Commerce Department finds, U.S. telecom carriers could be forced to quickly remove Huawei equipment or face fines or other penalties. But why is it so hard to plug Huawei out of the system? Well, the key is cost. For years, small rural telecom providers had been installing cheaper Chinese-made routers and other technology on top of their cell towers, and they sometimes offer all-in-one solutions, Huawei that is. In many cases, these smaller carriers they find themselves with the only option for cellular coverage is actually Huawei, and many of them turned to Huawei for cheaper, reliable equipment, only to cut down on the initial cost and maintenance, but now seems like the reliance has been created. For example, beginning in late 2011, Viero, which is the largest regional provider in the Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska area, inked a contract with Huawei to provide the equipment for its upgrade to 3G. And a decade later, it has Huawei tech installed across its entire fleet of towers, roughly 1,000 spread over 5 Western states. By examining the Huawei equipment themselves, FBI investigators determined it could actually recognize and disrupt DoD spectrum communications, even though it had been certified by the FCC. And according to a source familiar with the investigation, around 2014, Viero started mounting high-definition surveillance cameras on its towers to live stream weather and traffic, a public service that's shared with local news organizations. But they were also inadvertently capturing the movement of U.S. military equipment and personnel, giving Beijing, or anyone for that matter, the ability to track the pattern of activity between a series of closely guarded military facilities. Huawei is already doing in so many other countries as well as in continents. For example, Huawei owns some 70% of telecom communications in Africa. In 4G and to upgrade the natural path to 5G, many are still choosing Huawei. Inside China's surveillance apparatus, which is rooted in its citizen control aspects using 5G cameras, the same technology can be said to be easily exported to use to spy on other countries and the people. All this feeds into a bigger picture too. They want to know what America is doing, whether that's in the military or the ordinary people in society. The idea is to collect information on America and to be better at subverting American society. And they really want to control America. A prime example of this is using social uproar and the internet manipulation aspect to generate public opinions in the United States. For example, in 2020, CNN reported that TikTok was widely used by BLM creators and activists to spread information about the protest. TikTok, which has 80 million monthly active users in the United States, 80% are between the ages of 16 to 34. And it just happens that the large majority of the user base of TikTok falls into the ripe age of political activism and tend to lean left. You see where I'm going with this, right? 60% of TikTok users are Gen Zers, which are Gen Zers are considered trendsetters in today's society when it comes to digital consumerism. Next year, 74 million people in the United States will be part of Gen Z, which will make them the largest generation of all. And they're born after 1996, which means they once again lead the new social revolution online, and whatever they tend to believe in politically seems to be trending more than any of the other age groups. And China's TikTok has mastered algorithms to push the messaging of the left or any messaging that essentially matters because China knows that the social chaos in the United States is amplified by its online footprint, whereby Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Google are primarily for pushing these social agendas and to create social division and chaos. This is quite beneficial for the CCP, not to mention collecting data on those young people. Huawei is in the same boat. They disrupt society by creating a monopoly built on cheap equipment and high coverage. Why buy other equipment when Huawei can get you to the price / to the max at a fraction of what you have to pay for if it was an American or a British company? And thank you so much for watching tonight. This is China Insider. I'm David Zhang. We'll see you next time.